What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the PFN Scouting Podcast. We've been rolling in some combine previews for you over the past couple of weeks. We're going to be there. We're going to have boots on the ground this week, covering the event, interviewing players, recapping the risers and sliders through those few days. But for now, we're not quite there yet. So we do have one more thing to review before we get to the NFL Combine, and that is my good friend A.J. Schulte's full 7-round mock, the last pre-combine mock. So it's kind of positioned at a very interesting precipice in the 2024 NFL draft cycle in the offseason. So we're going to get into that. We're going to go through all of the picks, some of the more intriguing ones, some of the combine risers, the quarterback situation. But first, before we get into that mock draft, AJ, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing well, dude. It's been a productive week. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's been a productive week. Yeah, it's been a little overwhelming, right? It's kind of we're at that phase in
Yeah.
the cycle. I know you're doing a lot of the pick rewrites and stuff to help our readers stay up to date on those things, and then more reports on my end and too. And so it's a lot of information this time of year. It can be overwhelming at times, but it's fun. And it's every little bit of information is another piece of the puzzle, and I think mock drafts play a very important function in that as well. Kind of applying those different pieces and kind of consolidating it into a new projection, right? So it's always a fun exercise to go through. I want to ask you before we get into the nitty gritty with the mock draft, was this one more a projective one, more of what you would do, or was it kind of blending both elements of that together? Because I know people always have different lenses that they look at mock drafts through. Some people are like, oh, this pick isn't going to happen, it's never going to happen, but it's a mock draft. The point is to project and to experiment with different outcomes. But I know every draft analyst who writes mocks too has a different slider, what they apply, whether it's fully projective or less projective and more kind of what I would do from my evaluation. So how do you look at a 7-round mock when you approach it?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both
Mhm.
on my end. A lot of it is, especially now at this stage, a lot of it is just like information that we're kind of getting. It is a little bit of projection, especially on this one where I talked about like different trades and different like hypothetical scenarios that are kind of the smoke, so to speak, right now. But it is a little bit of like a what I would do. But most of the time, I try to stay like this is what the team typically looks for in a corner or a pass rusher. So I try to use that information a lot. Um, but for this one, I definitely it was a combination of both. I don't think like for a couple of these guys who kind of fell, they don't necessarily match the consensus, and I disagreed a little bit on some of those players. So there is a little bit of that, but for the most part, it's pretty much just sticking with kind of like information and different team thresholds and things like that.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up because for me personally, when every mock is different, you'd like to experiment with different things. You never want to do the same thing over and over again because then what's the point, right? But I think, doing a what you would do standpoint within the thresholds that right? I feel like that's the best description for what usually goes on. And I do want to shout out one more time again, just make sure, guys, check out AJ's mock if you haven't yet. Full 7-rounder. I know firsthand how much of an undertaking a full 7-rounder is. It takes days, it takes a lot of effort,
Yeah.
some extra time too. So it is not an easy one. And he had player trades in this one too. So another loophole getting integrated in there.
Yeah.
So a lot of detail, a lot of hard work. Make sure you check his mock out. But let's get into it. Let's get into the meat and bones here. We've got a lot to cover. And I think we got to start with round one, obviously, right? That's where all the implications are. But this was a fun mock, I thought. And we'll start with the quarterbacks in round one. You had pretty standard at the top, right? Caleb Williams, number one, Drake May, number two, Jaden Daniels, number three. But then you kind of had an interesting pick, JJ McCarthy going to the Giants at number six. And then there wasn't another quarterback taken in round one or round two, but then you had four going in round three. Bo Nix to the Jets, I believe. Spencer Rattler
Hmm.
to the what was it?
Raiders.
Raiders. The Raiders. All right, I knew I forgot one, but then you had Penix to the Steelers, and you had Michael Pratt to the Denver Broncos, which was a nice one too. So, talk to me about the quarterbacks, and mainly, because we've talked at length about Williams and May and Daniels and their potential fits, but JJ McCarthy to the Giants was the interesting one for me because the Giants
Yeah.
have a looming need, but they're not ready to 100% admit it, right? So it's like, do they take that chance if they can get him without trading, without maneuvering around? What went into that pick?
Yeah. So the kind of the buzz recently is that the Giants aren't super sold on Daniel Jones as their long term option. It came out, I believe, yesterday. ESPN had reported that they would be open to taking a quarterback in this year's draft if the right one fell.
Mhm.
What that necessarily means at this point is anyone's guess. But I think JJ McCarthy fits what both head coach Brian Dable and offensive coordinator Mike Kafka like at quarterback. He's got the kind of mobility and the tools that both of them have had similar success with in the past. And I think if you have, Daniel Jones only has one more year of guaranteed money left. So after this upcoming season, they can move on without a huge, massive cap hit, dead cap hit, excuse me. I think if you have JJ McCarthy with his tools and you kind of can just sit him for a year and let him develop with those two guys who I think are phenomenal offensive minds. uh, I think that that works. It also adds a little bit of job security to you because you now are sitting here saying, "Hey, this is our guy. We finally got to pick our guy at quarterback, and this is who we want. We want to build around him." And so I think that aspect of it, and JJ McCarthy, they're going to be kind of it's going to be interesting to see if somebody tries to move up to 5 because there's already this amount of smoke about the Giants being interested in a quarterback. If somebody tries to leapfrog
Yeah.
them specifically for a quarterback, but I just think in terms of team fit, I think McCarthy fits what they like. I think his best bet I think is just kind of developing for a year, and I think that would be a really good situation for him. That, and I was also just kind of tired of the same picks
Mhm.
over and over. It's like, oh, McCarthy, somebody trades up for McCarthy, and it's usually like the Vikings or the Raiders or and you know what? No, the Giants are sitting here saying, "Hey, we're not totally sold on Daniel Jones being our guy. Why not? Why not? This is it's different and unique, and I always strive to do something that stands out
Mhm.
in a mock draft because it's a mock draft, like
Yeah. Yeah, no,
especially at this stage of the game, like
exactly.
it's all about just presenting different scenarios.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's the biggest thing. I love how we obviously put in a ton of work for these, right? Like, we're analyzing every single detail and scenario and potential outcome and, like, why maybe they would feel this way, why. But I love how sometimes it just comes down to, "You know what? I'm gonna do something different. I'm gonna go against the grain." I love how that's, like, the final piece, but no, and it's one of those things, it's that thought tangent that makes you think about it, right? Like, the Giants aren't 100% sold, and I was going to bring up that exact thing too. Like, a lot of mock drafts have the Chargers as a trade down destination for a team in need of a QB, and that is one spot above the Giants. So for the Giants, if no team takes that opportunity, right, and you have the chance to get him at number 6, if they like him that much, like, I can see a scenario where they use pick number 6, right, so that the Chargers only move down one spot, right. They're still keeping that real estate, and you can get McCarthy too. But you know, it's one of those things where so many teams are trading up to that 5th spot in mock drafts. The Chargers are a very popular destination, so you don't always see McCarthy fall to this point, right? So it's like, if he does fall,
Mhm.
is he going to generate appeal? It's a fun discussion to have. And he does. To me, he has the talent. How do you feel about his valuation, real quick, at that spot? Because I know everyone's split across the board. To me,
Yeah, it's definitely
yeah.
interesting. His overall stock. I've talked to people who are like, I wouldn't take him until the second round. I've talked to people who have said like he's the top 5 pick in the draft.
Mhm.
Like there's no questions about it. I think he'll be a great NFL quarterback. I think like if Harbaugh had stayed and he had stayed another year, I think we would be talking about McCarthy as like a no brainer because his biggest thing was I just wanted to see like a little bit more seasoning.
Mhm.
But if he can just sit and develop for a year in an NFL offense and kind of add a little bit better weight, uh, because he's thin,
Yeah.
like he's small,
Mhm.
and that's going to be an issue. I think it'll also be an issue for Jaden Daniels. But I think if you can kind of let him sit for a little while, kind of just develop and get everything sorted out, he's got all the talent in the world.
Mhm.
I think his quarterbacks like him don't typically fall very often, and he has the intangibles. The NFL just has consistently raved about JJ McCarthy. I think the talking point of like he wasn't asked to throw often, I think is kind of a little overblown.
Mhm.
He threw it enough times. It's not like he threw 10 passes a game, right? So I think he's a pretty good prospect. I think he's better than like Will Levis and a couple of those other guys. In like we've seen as like the QB4
Mhm.
in recent drafts. I think it's always about like projecting
Yeah.
with quarterbacks because it's always what are they going to look like in 3 years? And if you're JJ McCarthy, you take it, you're the Giants, and you take him sixth overall.
Mhm.
You're betting on saying he's a top, at least top 15, top 10 starter in the NFL in a few years, and he's got the tools to be that.
Yeah, and I think the 3 years thing is interesting because JJ McCarthy in 3 years, like, is Will Levis last year, or is Michael Penix Jr. or Bo Nix this year, right? Like, those guys are 24. Levis turned 24, right, his rookie year, I think. Penix and Nix are already pretty much there, so it's like you have that 3-year period of developmental, potential, right, that you don't have with other guys. And so for me,
Mhm.
my stance with McCarthy has always been, I mean, yeah, he's got the talent, what happens beyond that is up to NFL teams. And I think for him more so than most guys or all guys, winning them over off the field as that character presence, as that guy with the mental acuity and the mental and the mindset to sustain growth year over year, I think is the biggest thing behind closed doors. Does he have it right? And if you make that discernment, it doesn't really matter that he hasn't proven everything at the collegiate level because he's 21 years old. He's athletic. He's got an arm, right? After that, it's just is he worth the investment? So that's always been it's really interesting because there's so many different nuances to QB evaluation, but sometimes it can be that simple for projecting guys and where they're going to go. So it's
Yeah.
a fun discussion to have for the QBs. Let's move on to some other guys in round one, some interesting picks that I circled. First off, for me, well, first off, I want to hear from you. What were your favorite picks in round one? Because I know every time I do a 7 rounder, I have picks that I like circled, like, oh man, this fit would be insane. This would be maniacal, right? What are some fits that you made and you were just like, oh, I'd love to see this happen.
I think my first one was Roma Dunze to the
That's
Broncos.
one I was going to
I
talk
just
about actually, because
yeah,
the Bears had a chance to take him at 9, and they took a tackle, right? I believe.
and they took Fashanu.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what talk to me about that a little bit, right? Because we've seen
Yeah.
offensive tackle mocked to the Bears. Me personally, I'm not 100% sold that they need it because they drafted Darnell Wright. I know Braxton Jones has been a little up and down, but he's a young guy who's got talent. How do you stack that? Having a Dunze on the board,
Yeah.
upgrading tackle. How do you stack that?
It was definitely a tough
Mhm,
call there at night. I think if you're going to invest in Caleb Williams at first overall in this specific scenario, you need to have an offensive line that is going to step up
mhm,
and protect for a while because Caleb Williams, I think as he adjusts to the NFL, is going to take some unnecessary sacks.
mhm.
I think there are definitely like things that he'll have to iron out in terms of like pocket management and things like that. But you have to have your pass protection significantly better than it was this year. Braxton Jones has talent. I don't know if he like what he is like what you hope he can be is what Fashanu was like 2 years ago.
Mhm,
And I think when you look at like you have a chance to get a guy who projects as a pretty elite pass protector virtually right away. And you look at Ryan Poles' background has been significantly involved with offensive line. He's very well credited with the offensive line masterminds program, and Fashanu's working with them
mhm.
this offseason. I think that pick, it's like Braxton Jones is good. I just don't think he is like as good as Fashanu. And with how talented this wide receiver class is, you're not going to find like you can find production at wide receiver. You won't find an elite pass protecting tackle until you're like, especially because they don't pick again until the third
Yeah,
round.
and I agree. I agree
Like,
with that. There's 20, upwards of 20, maybe even more than that, wide receivers who could probably make an impact on day one. And there's it's a really strong tackle class at the top, but then there is a little bit of a drop off in the 8 to 10 to 12 range. You still have guys with
mhm.
talent, but not as much certainty. So I definitely get that. Talk to me about Roma Dunze and the fit with Denver though, because that one was a fun one when I saw it. I was because he
Yeah,
usually doesn't make it that far.
it's no, again, it's all about just different scenarios, and with McCarthy going that high, a couple of other tackles going high, he just kind of fell,
Mhm,
and that's not a slight against his talent. Like people, I at the angrier comments are always like, "He would never fall that far," and it's like, listen, he's a great player. It's just different scenarios happen. Players fall all the time.
mhm,
But in the case of Odunze, like I don't know how much of the three of Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, and Jerry Judy will be on the Broncos roster come 2025. I don't know if any of the three will be there. Jerry Judy is constantly in trade rumors. Cortland Sutton could be. Tim Patrick just hasn't stayed healthy enough after his new contract extension. Marvin Mims, he was a second team All Pro returner, flashed a lot of playmaking ability, but it was never a seemingly consistent outing from really any of the Broncos wide receivers. And I think with that uncertainty combined with just like the team fit, like he was the best player available
Mhm,
on the spot. And the Broncos need as much talent as they can get. If you can come out of this draft, like if you take Odunze in the first round, that window before day two where some trades kind of happen, if you can go, okay, well, now we can offload Jerry Judy for a couple more picks in this, in the upcoming rounds, or Cortland Sutton or whoever, because now you have a Dunze. Now you have him, and you could turn around and say, okay, now we can commit to this trade for as many, because I think the Broncos are heading for a rebuild
mhm,
this year and just trying to get as much young talent and picks, kind of what the Rams did last year, where they were just kind of like cleaning out a lot of bad contracts and trying to get as much young talent
mhm.
as they can. And they hit on a few guys last year, but I really think like this year, this is the year where you just add as much talent as you possibly can to your roster. And Adunze was a combination of that and team fit and need.
Yeah, and I love that, and it's stark with the Broncos because they have that big gap. They don't have a second round pick, right? So I think with the Broncos, and I think the Rams are a good parallel to make because if you can trade back and maybe get a guy like Brian Thomas Jr. as well, and then you trade back, you get more capital on day three. One big thing that accelerated the Rams rebuild was hitting on day three picks, right, and getting that exceptional value in that range. So speaking of Thomas, I want to talk about that. He went to the Houston Texans in this one. That was another one of my favorite fits. Just kind of really intrigued by it, right? Because I updated my report of him last week. The dude is so explosive. I mean, he's so fluid for his size, and he's still pretty new to the wide receiver position too, which is pretty exciting. The way he attacks the ball, in my opinion, is one of the best in the class. Extended beyond his frame, and but how does he? I'm curious about the fit in that offense and what your vision was for that because I'm very intrigued by it. I think Nico Collins is that X guy. I think Tank Dell slot movement Z. You can move him around. He's very explosive. He's dynamic. Brian Thomas Jr. is very interesting because mainly vertical usage at LSU, a lot of slot fades, a lot of nine routes, but crossers on drags too. I think there's some rack utility there. I think there are different ways that you can use him and expand beyond what we've seen. Bobby Slovic, Shanahan tree. How does Brian Thomas Jr. fit that vision, and how can he kind of complete this wide receiver trio?
Yeah, it was kind of like the Adunze pick where it was just like a best player
Mhm.
available scenario. But I think if you have the opportunity to turn that wide receiver room into like a real young strength of your team for years to come with CJ Stroud, like sign me up. I
Mhm.
think Thomas, it is a little bit of projection, like you said, with his mainly vertical usage. But again, I think it's what he can do versus what he was asked to
Yeah.
do in that scenario. And I definitely think he can run a little bit more of a route tree than he did at LSU. Um, I think you have intangibility with him and or interchangeability, excuse me, with him and Nico Collins at X. You can kind of keep him outside, move Tank Dell around. Like these pieces can all fit in different scenarios. It is a little bit of projection with in terms of like what like can he actually do it? But I just think when you look at the talent and his ability as an actual like wide receiver prospect, him and CJ Stroud, I think would be a perfect pairing
Oh
just
yeah.
in terms of he unlocks a
Yeah.
new element of that offense. And in case Nico Collins goes down like that, you need another big red zone threat wide
Mhm.
receiver. And then you look at Noah Brown is a free agent. Robert Woods is getting up there in age and only has 1 year left on his deal. So now you have an opportunity to take a guy and add him long term to Nico Collins, who's probably going to get a contract extension in the offseason, and Tank Dell, who's still in his rookie contract. It really seemed like the perfect let's just make a really dynamic trio. And it was fun. Like
Mhm.
I want to see Brian Thomas catching deep balls and these go shots off of play action with CJ Stroud.
Yeah, that was just the image in my head, man, with Stroud's ball placement and anticipation and with Thomas's ability to create that separation with his stacking speed. I mean, it's and then his ball tracking ability, it's a match made. in heaven pretty much. And I was just like, I this is a trio I would really want to see. And I think this might have been the first time that I've seen Brian Thomas Jr. mock to Houston, right? Like you see him mock to a lot of teams in the teens, right? The Bills, if he falls to 28, is a big one, but I've never seen him go to Houston, I think. And that was just like that really caught my eye. So I love that. A few other first rounders that I really liked. Just let me pull up my list here. Nate Wiggins to Jacksonville was a fun one. I think Ryan Nielsen's scheme, I was really intrigued by that. And I think he's one guy we pegged as an NFL combine riser, expected to run very fast. He's got the press man tools, but zone recognition ability as well, ball skills. Jackson Powers Johnson to Seattle, man, I like that one a lot too. They got needs at center and guard, and the dude is just an absolute road grader. I mean, 6'3", 330, but he's very intelligent for his age too. So just a day one impact starter. Amarius Mims to Pittsburgh was another one that I wanted to circle because it was reported that he's fully healthy now from his tightrope surgery, and he's going to actually test at the NFL Combine. So 6'7", 330 pounds. Don't be surprised if this dude puts up incredible numbers for that size. He's a freak athlete, and I think for Pittsburgh in particular, having a guy who can play the left and the right side, has experience with Broderick Jones as well. That'll be a fun one for me. Um, and then one more that I had was Darius Robinson to Detroit. I really liked that fit. I know that's been one that's been thrown around a little bit, but again, 6'5", 280, right? Almost 36-inch arms. The dude is athletic, alignment versatile, powerful, right? So that was a fun one. Dallas Turner to Tampa Bay as well. If he falls that far, man, you got to pull the trigger, especially after they just cut Shaq Barrett, I think. So getting an explosive
Mhm.
finesse rusher who has that shock in his hands and that versatility, and he's still just 21 years old. I mean, he's very young and he's trending up. So that was another one that I liked. Any other first rounders that you had on your favorites list before we move on to day two and day three?
I got to talk about Johnny Newton to the
Oh,
Cowboys.
yes.
I I think that one was it was tough with the Cowboys because it was like I with them bringing back Tyron Smith or like at least actively saying they want to bring him
Yeah.
back, and there's no reason why they shouldn't. And then Terrence Steele still having plenty of money on his contract. I was like, tackle. I don't necessarily want to go tackle here because I didn't like any of the
Yeah.
options
And
with
I think
them.
Smith, I
Eh,
think there's been whispers that he wants to remain in Dallas too. So, yeah.
yeah, and especially with both Barton and Jackson Powers Johnson off the board at that point, I feel like 24 is a little bit too early
Mhm.
for Frazier at that stage. And so I was like, you know what, Newton is going to be the best player available if he's here. Well, you know, Dallas has good three tech play in Odigizua, and now you can add Newton to that rotation. Like they still need to get more disruptive up front,
Mhm.
and they still need to add to that defensive line. Especially if you're trying to complement, like be like what the 49ers are. 49ers have had plenty of talented defensive linemen. And you look at Mike Zimmer's history, the defensive line has been a key integral part of him and his success. And I think now if you can add him to Odigizua and Mozzie Smith presumably gaining back the
Yeah.
weight and moving over
That's the
back
biggest
to
thing, I think.
the one tech. I thought that was a good combination of adding a talented, the best player available on a board to a kind of a sneaky need for Dallas, adding more depth in their interior.
Yeah, and I like the value proposition there too. Newton is still a top 20 guy on my board. I'm a big fan of. I know he's a little undersized, but just the football intelligence that he plays with and run defense, and then as a pass rusher too, like that flexibility. That's one reason he's still my DT1. I think the ankle flexion,
Yeah.
the hip flexibility, the torso flexibility that he has, those are finishing traits, and he has those better than anyone in the class, I think. So I would love his fit alongside Smith if Smith can gain back that weight. That's the big thing because he played pretty
Mhm.
underweight relative to what he played at Michigan. But yeah, I loved a lot of those first rounders. Listeners out there, if we didn't bring up your team's first rounder, be sure to check out the mock and see who your team picked. I know a lot of intriguing selections, but we are halfway through here, so let's get on to day two and day three. A few interesting developments in day two for me, and I'll just go through some of the things that caught my eye, and then we can get into some of the more specific things. But Chop Robinson to Washington was a really fun one. I liked that for sure. After he tests, I'm curious to see where he goes, but I think there is a little bit of a trade off there, double edged sword, because I expect a big 40 time, big explosiveness, but the length is not going to be quite as much there as it is with his teammate Adisa Isaac, for example. But getting him with Dan Quinn and the Commanders, man. Oh man, I love that fit. That was one of my favorites. Just oh my god, you need a bona fide, speed rusher, just a dynamic presence like Chop Robinson in that edge room. So I love that for sure. Ennis Rakestraw to Tennessee was a fun one. I liked that fit a lot. I like his man coverage chops and the speed too. You had two linebackers inside the top 50, which was intriguing to me because we've heard all the talk about this linebacker class. And, I don't think there's a bona fide first round talent. And I don't think there's, a guy who's locked into the round two either. But I do think if some of these guys test well enough, and you had Edgerrin Cooper going to the Green Bay Packers with Jeff Halfley in that defense, and then you had Junior Colson going to the Vikings with Brian Flores, which that was a fun one to think about for sure. Ricky Pearsall going in the top 75. I believe he went to
The
the
Lions.
Lions, which Ben Johnson with Ricky Pearsall, man. I mean, hey, that versatility that he has, weaponized that early on. You've got Jaden Hicks going to Seattle at number 78. That was an intriguing one for me because we don't always see him up that high. And then Jarvis Brownlee going to Atlanta at 79 was another one that caught my eye in day two. But so any specific things on day two that you noted that was intriguing to you as you were going through this projection?
Yeah, I kind of just want to talk about the
Yeah.
linebackers there at the top. It is definitely going to be an interesting dynamic of how does each team stack this talent. But I just think in terms of like scheme fit, I thought Cooper, especially with the
Mhm.
Packers moving to kind of more of a four down look, it presumably moving on from Devondre Campbell. I'm assuming that means Quay Walker is going to move to more of that like Mike, like middle linebacker role,
Mhm.
whatever you want to call it, and that leaves open the weak side spot. And you look at they also need the depth because behind them is really just like Isaiah McDuffie.
Yeah. And he's probably a
Um,
special teamer at best. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, like he is a good player, but he's a role player.
Yeah.
He's not a true three down guy. And Cooper, I thought was one of the best will like weak side linebacker. I have him kind of split into like guys I think can play middle linebacker and guys who I think play more like a weak side or strong side linebacker.
Mhm.
And Cooper, I think, is the best one to be a weak side linebacker. Just that the range, the pursuit speed
Mhm.
that he's got, the athleticism that he has in terms of like matching guys out of the backfield and things like that. I tweeted it out in response to somebody who asked me about him yesterday, but I said he reminds me a lot of Owusu Koromoa
Mhm.
up with the Browns, just in terms of an overall athletic profile and how he plays. And so I thought it was a good fit for what they look for, and I think they're going to value linebacker position with Jeff Halfley, and kind of the Packers run defense has kind of been an issue
Mhm.
over the last few years. And I think they're going to finally start to adjust to that. And with Junior Colson, I just think the Vikings need to add as much blue chip talent as they can get on that defense. And when you look at his ability to match up in zone coverage, you look at his ability as a blitzer, I think Brian Flores is going to love
Mhm.
a guy with Junior Colson, that athletic profile at that size. Him pairing with Ivan Pace as well, I think that creates a lot of opportunities for unique pressure looks as well, because Ivan Pace is a tremendous blitzer, one of the best blitzing linebackers, especially last year. Just as a rookie, it was really fun to watch. I just love that pairing, even though it is a little higher than what I've seen in other mock drafts. I just thought the fit with those two teams, and I don't think that they would make it to their next picks. So I was like, it just makes sense to slot them here.
Yeah, and two guys who I think their athletic testing too will probably lock it in. And I want to say like there's always an asterisk when we talk about athletic testing and like guys rising because NFL teams at this point not only have GPS data too, right? But then also, I mean, it's pretty easy to tell who's a freak athlete on the tape. Like Edgerrin Cooper, that guy's an athlete, right? Junior Colson, that guy's an athlete, right? The numbers more serve as confirmation and cross checking, right? So it's not gonna cause too much elasticity on the NFL board side, right? The media side, we naturally just don't have as much of a perspective on that yet. So it's more so peeling back the layers to their true evaluation than it is actually tangible changes being made. So, but it's fun, right? I think those are two guys who the athleticism is definitely going to come into the forefront at the NFL Combine, and Two guys who are definitely, like you said, I mean, athletic, dynamic, and Flores' scheme with the versatility with Colson. I love that. I think Edrin Cooper, the coverage upside is very appealing. I think there are times on tape where I do want him to be a little more disciplined with his eyes. Sometimes he'll turn away from the QB, and that can, leave him liable for some coverage busts. But I do think there's a lot of talent there for sure. So big fan of those guys. We're talking about day two real quick. So let's circle real quick back to the quarterbacks. I won't have us talk at length about all of them, but Bo Nix, you got Bo Nix to the Jets, you got Rattler to the Raiders, Penix to the Steelers, and Pratt to the Broncos. Which of those is your favorite prospect team fit on day two?
I've circled the Pratt and Broncos connection for a while.
Mhm,
Um, but I actually really like the fit of Bo Nix with the Jets. I think a lot of the Knicks hype is more media than league driven at this, just given what I'm talking to talking to other scouts,
mhm,
and it doesn't really seem like the hype matches what the NFL is, and I think as an older prospect, guys just kind of naturally fall. Um with his question mark, he just seems like a more of a third round value.
mhm,
But him with the Jets, the Jets owner Woody Johnson has come out and said we needed an actual backup quarterback last year. Like we needed something there, and Bo Nix just kept falling in this scenario. Like I was like, I just don't really like the fit there. I don't like the fit there. But with the Jets, I think now you have that backup ability. We have no idea how long Aaron Rodgers is going to play.
mhm.
Quite frankly, at this stage, we just don't know. We don't actually even know for certain what his health is currently
Yeah.
for this upcoming year. And like he's in his 40s. Who's to say this won't happen? I mean, maybe not next season, but the year after. When so now I think with the Jets, they need that long term kind of backup stability of a talented rookie quarterback. And I also think he fits their scheme fairly well. They
Mhm,
have the playmakers around him for the most part. I think they have a strong running game with Brees Hall, which will help him a lot. You have Garrett Wilson, just kind of throw it up near Garrett Wilson, and he'll come down with it. And I think Bo Nix can operate the kind of West Coast offense that they're wanting to run. And so it just felt like a natural fit as well. But with Pratt to the Broncos, with that one, there's a lot of connections already with Sean Payton, different quarterback trainers and things like that, and different coaches like connections
mhm,
there. But I also think Pratt is the best fit with Sean Payton in that offense, just in terms of being able to throw with timing, throwing in rhythm, managing a pocket. Like, yes, he doesn't have the same arm talent that Spencer Rattler does, but Sean Payton really struggled with Russell Wilson this year, not throwing with timing and not operating the offense the way that he wanted it to be run. I don't think Michael Pratt will have that issue.
mhm,
So it really just felt like a natural fit with the two of them. And Spencer Rattler is just doesn't have the same feel with timing.
mhm,
And so that was why I went with Pratt directly over Rattler. They were picked right next to each other um, with the Broncos and Raiders. So it was really just about team fit with all of these quarterbacks, and I really liked Pratt's fit with Peyton.
mhm. Yeah, the Broncos, real quick, like, what is your instinct that they do with QB, right? Assuming they don't solve that in free agency because they don't have a ton of cap, right? It seems like something that they're going to have to attack in the draft if they do attack it. But at number 12 overall, right? I think it's number 12, right? Their pick. Yeah, it's number 12. At number 12, you're kind of out of range for the top guys. You're going to have to trade up if you want McCarthy, and that's going to cost a lot of capital, which you don't have, right? If you don't pick a QB in round one, you have a gap until round three. And so some of those priority guys, right? In this mock draft, we have Nix and Penix and Rattler all falling to round three. But I feel like it is just as likely that a team in round two could say, hey, round two, these guys have starting upside. Let's pull the trigger, right? So that gap really increases the variance of whether or not they could even have a guy like that land into their lap in round three. So not having that chance, like, what is your feel that the Broncos do to address that, right? Because their hands are kind of tied behind their back a little bit. They're not fully in control of the outcome here. So what do they do?
Yeah.
Do they trade up for a guy in round one? Do you think McCarthy could win over Peyton with his tools, or what's the feeling here? Because I always, every time I do a mock draft, I find myself half and half, sitting on the fence, really just not quite sure how to address that for them.
Yeah, I think it was like kind of what I touched on earlier, where I think if you view this season with the Broncos as a rebuilding year,
Mhm,
it opens up the possibilities for them. I think yeah, the Russell Wilson situation is done. I think that is he said, "Oh, I want to stay in Denver." I don't think that's going to happen.
mhm,
Um, so now it's like they're obviously not going to just roll with just Jared Stidham at quarterback. Like that's not going to you just can't run a quarterback room like that. But I think if you know picking at 12 is just kind of a bad spot, like you said. You're out of range of the top guys, and presumably, now you don't have a lot of capital. I think they only have maybe 5 or 6
mhm.
picks in total. So you already have very limited capital to begin with. So I think now your goal shouldn't be to kind of find that quarterback just yet. I think your goal should be to accumulate talent right now because you can kind of manage at quarterback. But again, like Sean Payton can get the most out of guys. Um, I think the Pratt pick makes a lot of sense because it's a guy who fits naturally with Peyton. And if he doesn't work out, it's a third round pick.
Mhm.
You can take a guy in round one if it falls later for you. But if it does work out, you have a cheap third round contract at quarterback, right? It is definitely tricky for them. They're in a tough spot to navigate. I kind of feel like Pratt and Stidham is the kind of quarterback room Sean Payton will want.
Yeah, and it's tricky again too because that third rounder, if you don't use it on a quarterback, you could use it to fill one of the many, many needs that the Broncos have across the roster too. So they're in a tricky spot, right? So there's not one catch-all solution for you. So then it's how do
Yeah.
you balance that? And I do agree. I think Pratt is a guy maybe won't be a long-term starter, but a guy who can navigate muddy waters early on in the right situation. I think he's a quarterback, like you said, with the sense of timing, the accuracy, the poise, right? The starting experience, the 4-year starter at Tulane, a guy who could help Sean Payton at least keep the ship afloat early on. And even if you don't have a long term starter, I think you got a really good long term safety blanket, right? A guy who can feel
Mhm.
comfortable with those spot starting opportunities. So I'd like that a lot. We got a little bit under 10 minutes to go. So any favorite day two picks on your end that you circled before we move on to some day three guys?
Mm, that's tough. I really like the fit of Austin Booker with the
Oh
Ravens.
yeah, I like that
I
one
think
too.
that's one that I had circled I had originally put him to the Lions, but I was like, wait, well, it doesn't. I had flipped a lot of the picks early on. So I had originally had the Lions taking a corner in round one and then edge in the second. I kind of flipped that later on.
Mhm.
But I think Austin Booker, when you look at how the Baltimore Ravens have been so good at maximizing talent over the years, Booker is just right on the cusp of being a star. I think he has all the tools and traits you want. If he could just develop, like just kind of add a little bit more weight to his frame. We're talking about a Pro Bowl caliber pass rusher. And Baltimore just always seems to find a guy that just falls right into their lap, right? Like it's just like, oh, of course he ends up with the Ravens. Like
Mhm.
he's too good, of course. And I think Booker was the perfect combination of that and need. Like they need somebody else in that pass rush room, especially if Clowney and Kyle Van Noy walk.
Yeah.
We don't know if Ajabo could stay healthy. Owe has flashed, but he's not hasn't really been a true consistent 3 down guy just yet. I think Booker, if you add a little bit more weight to his frame, I think you're talking about a talented, like huge upside starter. So I just feel like that was a great pick. The last one that I do want to hit is Jatavion Sanders with the Patriots.
Mhm.
I've seen him go a lot in the second round. It just didn't fall that way in this one. I love his ability as a seam threat. I think now you pair him with Jaden
Oh yeah.
Daniels in this specific mock, and you have Lad McConkey as well in the second. That opens up a lot, and they have a need. Hunter Henry and Mike Gesicki are both free agents, so I think he fills that role well. He's not. I'd be curious to see what his testing is in the combine this week. But
Mhm.
Sanders, I think, is a seam threat, ability after the catch, tight end. I think he could be highly productive in that scheme.
Yeah, alignment versatile too, and you can mix and match with him and McConkey a little bit. So I think with Jaden Daniels, especially, things that Daniels excels at is that ball placement over the shoulder, right? On the deep third, on the vertical plane, right? And things that Sanders excels at working up the seam, making those body control catches, right? So definitely a big plus, I think, in that department. So let's move on to round three. Day three. We've got about 5 minutes left, so try and hit on some guys. Some of my favorite day three picks, and these are always some of my favorites to hit because, as you said, as you go further down the board, different value propositions emerge. Guys fall, as you mentioned. Like good players fall all the time, right? That's one certainty of the draft process, and so kind of lucking into optimal value at these ranges can be very, very appealing. So some of my favorite day three guys, and then we'll talk about some of yours, and we'll kind of wrap it up here. But I had Xavier Thomas to New England actually, so another Patriots one. I love his fit. I think Gerard Mayo would know how to weaponize him on day one, and they love those guys who can rush from space and well leveraged but powerful. Tenacious, violent hands as well, bendy, explosive. Big fan of that one. You got Max Melton to the Chargers. I thought that was incredible value. He's the top 64 guy for me, and I think that slot boundary versatility is very appealing with him. Jermaine Burton, Tennessee, speed, route running, toughness. I like that one a lot. You got Bo Bray to Chicago, another one. Love his fit with Jaquan Brisker at safety. You got Andrew Phillips to Minnesota, another slot boundary versatile guy who showed out at Senior Bowl. I still think he's pretty underrated. I haven't gotten around to writing his report yet, but he seems chippy. He seems athletic enough, fluid enough, and really physical getting inside the wide receiver's cage. Ben Sinnott to San Francisco, the versatility there to play H back, but then also be a quality tight end. I love that as well. Malik Mustafa to Indianapolis. That one was one that I was like, oh, shoot, let's go. I like that one a lot. He's one of my favorite players, explosive, rangy, but physical as well. 5'9, 7'8, 210 pounds. Just a tenacious competitor who's got some of that projected versatility. Malik Washington to Carolina, just a sure handed, tough guy with that three-level framework. And then Dylan Lobby to Green Bay, the Packers, was my final favorite one that I wrote down. The receiving versatility, but then also some running upside too. So some of my favorite day three ones. Who were some of your favorite day three picks here?
Oh gosh.
And
I think the
we're
first one
rolling at around 3 minutes, so let's limit ourselves to like five here.
the the first one I think that I had when I had it written down, I was like, this is just ridiculously fun.
Mhm.
Bucky Irving with the
Oh
Chiefs.
yeah.
That fit of him, that springy explosiveness that he plays with. I think you can add him as kind of your McKinnon replacement and kind of use him as a receiver the way that I think they had envisioned Edwards-Helaire. I love that fit. I also Cam Hart to the Broncos. We've touched on. I think he's a tremendous boundary corner. Marshawn Lloyd kind of stepping in with the Colts, kind of replacing Zach Moss and just adding a little bit more explosiveness, which is what they've emphasized throughout the offseason.
Mhm.
Jalen Wright, another one with the Vikings. I think they need that kind of dynamic rusher. I don't. He'll be an interesting one to see at the combine how much he can rise because I think his testing is going to be great. I
Mhm.
think he'll test phenomenal. Um, I'm kind of curious to see if he puts himself into day two
Yeah.
or if he's kind of like we're going to take him at the top of day three. I the one that is kind of interesting to me that I don't see all that often. I don't see Eric All in a lot of mock drafts,
Mhm.
but I think he's fun as
He's a
heck.
solid
Just
player.
I will always find these tight ends that I think always outproduce their stock, and all is going to do that. One last one, I have to go Gabriel Murphy to the Saints in the seventh.
Oh shoot.
I
I like that.
Murphy, like he's going to be a tricky one to gauge like what his stock is going to look like because he's a good player.
Mhm.
He's a good pass rusher, but he falls below the length thresholds. I think he has sub 31 arms,
Mhm.
and he's a little bit on the smaller side for a pass rusher. So I'll be curious to see how the NFL values that. But you add him into that pass rush room with the Saints and how well they've been able to maximize a lot of their pass rushers. You look at Carl Granderson is a recent developmental success story with them. I loved the fit there, and I think he's going to outproduce his draft stock
Yeah, and for this
no matter what it
for the
is.
Saints too, like one thing that I feel like from a personnel standpoint, they've been missing for a long time is having that speed guy, right? Like they like to do four down a lot, right? They like to have heavy personnel, but I think, the best pass rush units have varying player molds, guys who can play off of one another. I think having that speed, bendy guy with the hand usage, right, to win from wider alignments is something that they lack, but something that I think could fit really well with the personnel. So I love that a lot. We are about to wrap it up here, so we're almost out of time. Thank you all for listening. As always, it is AJ's 7 round mock on PFM. Make sure you check it out. A ton of great picks at the combine this week. We are going to have boots on the ground. Myself and Cam Meller will be recording there after each practice and testing session to give you the updates. And then next week, again on Tuesday, I'll be back with AJ to recap the event, give some of the risers, and kind of talk about the takeaways there. But for now, that's all we have. Thank you as always for tuning in to the PFN Scouting Podcast. See you next time.